What if I told you that one of the most powerful shifts in a man's confidence, energy, and intimate presence doesn't begin in the bedroom at all, but starts quietly at night, in a simple routine most men completely ignore, a routine that can change how he feels about himself before anything else even matters? There is a truth most men never hear clearly enough, and it's that performance, whether emotional, physical, or intimate, is rarely about a single moment. It is built slowly in the hours, habits, and quiet decisions that no one sees. When a man feels drained, disconnected, or mentally scattered, it doesn't just stay in his mind. It follows him into every interaction, especially the most personal ones. But when he starts to rebuild himself at night, when the world slows down and the pressure fades, something very different begins to form inside him. Not just energy, but presence. Not just strength, but control. Not just desire, but confidence that feels steady and natural rather than forced. The idea of a nighttime oil routine may sound simple, almost too simple, but simplicity is often where real transformation begins. This is not about magic solutions or exaggerated promises. It is about understanding how the body and mind respond to care, rhythm, and intentional touch. Throughout history, oils have been used not only for skin and grooming, but as part of grounding rituals, ways for a man to reconnect with his body after long days of stress and overstimulation. And in today's world, where men are constantly overstimulated but rarely recharged, that reconnection matters more than ever. When a man begins a calming nighttime routine involving natural oils, something subtle but powerful happens. First, the nervous system starts to shift. The constant tension from work pressure, digital overload, and emotional stress begins to ease. The body receives a signal that it is no longer in performance mode for the outside world, but entering recovery mode. This transition is essential because real intimate confidence is not built in exhaustion. It is built in restoration. The choice of oil itself is not about chasing trends, but about creating a sensory anchor. Warm textures, natural scents, and gentle application can help ground attention back into the body. Many men live disconnected from their physical self without realizing it. They operate in thought, stress, planning, reacting, but rarely in awareness of how their body actually feels. A simple oil routine changes that dynamic. It forces a moment of stillness, a pause where attention is no longer scattered outward but drawn inward. And this inward shift is where deeper change begins. Because performance in intimate relationships is not only physical, it is deeply psychological. When a man feels present in his body, he moves differently. He speaks differently. He listens differently. There is a calm authority in him that cannot be faked. It comes from being grounded rather than rushed, centered rather than anxious. Most men misunderstand what their partner truly responds to on a deeper level. It is not just physical capability or surface confidence. It is presence. It is the feeling that the man in front of her is fully there, not distracted, not distant, not mentally elsewhere. And that presence is trained, not guessed. It is built through repeated moments of reconnection with the self, especially in quiet environments like nighttime routines. As the oil is applied and gently worked into the skin, there is also a psychological layer at play. The brain associates consistent self-care rituals with stability. Over time, this signals safety to the nervous system. And when the nervous system is regulated, stress hormones lower, sleep quality improves, and the body naturally begins to restore its own balance. These internal shifts are not dramatic in a single night, but they accumulate quietly, and that accumulation is where transformation lives. It is also important to understand that intimacy begins long before physical closeness. It begins in how a man treats himself when no one is watching. A man who ignores his own well-being often carries that neglect into his relationships without realizing it. But a man who intentionally cares for his body, even in small ways like a nighttime oil ritual, starts to rewrite that internal message. He is no longer operating from depletion. He is operating from care, and care changes everything. It changes posture, tone of voice, emotional patience, and the ability to stay grounded under pressure. It reduces reactivity and increases awareness. These are not abstract traits. They are directly felt by a partner in subtle but powerful ways. A calm presence is felt before it is understood. A stable energy is recognized before it is analyzed. This is why so many relationships shift not because of grand gestures, but because of quiet internal changes that one partner undergoes. When a man begins to regulate himself better, especially through nighttime rituals that calm his system and reconnect him to his body, the dynamic of intimacy naturally improves. There is less tension, less misunderstanding, and more natural flow in connection. But there is also something even deeper happening here. When a man commits to a nightly ritual, even something as simple as oil massage or skincare, he is building discipline without pressure. He is proving to himself that he can show up for his own well-being consistently. And self-trust is one of the most overlooked foundations of intimate confidence. A man who trusts himself is no longer seeking validation in the same way. He is grounded in who he is becoming. And as that self-trust grows, so does emotional steadiness. He becomes less reactive to external validation and more anchored internally. This shift directly influences how he shows up in intimate spaces. He is no longer performing or overcompensating. He is simply being, and in that state of being, connection becomes more natural, more relaxed, and more genuine. The nighttime oil routine is not just about skin or routine. It is about reclaiming control over the internal state that shapes everything else. It is about ending the day not in stress, but in recovery. Not in distraction, but in presence. Not in exhaustion, but in quiet restoration. And once a man begins to experience that shift, even in small ways, he starts to realize something important. Intimacy is not something you chase. It is something you prepare for by how you live when no one is watching. As this nighttime oil routine becomes a consistent part of a man's life, something deeper than relaxation begins to unfold. It is no longer just about applying oil or following a simple habit. It becomes a signal to the mind that the day is complete and the body is safe enough to release everything it has been holding. And this release is where real transformation quietly begins. Most men carry the weight of their entire day into the night without realizing it, replaying conversations, worrying about responsibilities, and staying mentally active even when the body is exhausted. Over time, this creates a disconnect between physical rest and mental rest. And that disconnect slowly affects how present a man can be in emotionally and physically intimate moments. When the body is given a consistent cue of calm through a grounding nighttime ritual, the nervous system starts to recognize patterns of safety. This matters because intimacy is deeply connected to how safe and relaxed the body feels. When tension is high, the mind becomes focused on performance, outcomes, and self-doubt. But when the body is calm, awareness shifts away from pressure and into experience. A man begins to feel more natural in his presence, less concerned with overthinking how he is perceived, and more connected to what is actually happening in the moment. There is also a psychological shift that happens when self-care becomes intentional rather than accidental. Many men only take care of themselves when something feels wrong, when fatigue becomes too strong, or when stress turns into discomfort. But when care is practiced, even when nothing is wrong, the message sent to the subconscious is very different. It says that well-being is not a reaction, but a priority. This subtle internal shift builds a stronger foundation of emotional stability, which is essential in intimate relationships where unpredictability and vulnerability naturally exist. As the nighttime routine continues over days and weeks, the body starts to anticipate it. That anticipation alone begins to create a calming effect before the ritual even starts. This is how habits reshape internal states. The mind learns that after a long day, there is a moment of return, a moment where everything slows down and the focus shifts back to self. And in that return, a man begins to rebuild his relationship with his own body in a more respectful and attentive way. This reconnection is important because many men gradually become detached from their physical awareness due to constant external focus. Work demands attention outward, technology pulls attention outward, and even stress keeps the mind spinning outward. But intimacy requires inward awareness. It requires a man to feel present in his body, to understand his own state, and to remain grounded rather than scattered. The nighttime oil routine acts as a bridge back to that internal awareness, helping the mind settle into the body instead of staying lost in thought. Over time, this creates a noticeable shift in confidence. Not the loud or forced kind of confidence that tries to prove something, but a quieter, steadier confidence that comes from being regulated and centered. This type of confidence is often more impactful in intimate relationships because it does not feel like performance. It feels natural. It feels safe. It allows the partner to relax as well, because emotional states are often mirrored between two people without words being exchanged. Another important aspect of this routine is how it changes the relationship a man has with stress. Stress itself does not disappear, but its hold becomes weaker. Instead of carrying tension into every interaction, there becomes a clear boundary between the outside world and personal recovery time. This separation is essential for emotional clarity. Without it, stress leaks into communication, touch, and emotional availability. With it, a man learns to reset himself before engaging with others on a deeper level. There is also a subtle but powerful shift in self-perception. When a man consistently takes time at night to care for his body, even in a simple way, he begins to see himself differently. He is no longer someone who is just reacting to life. He becomes someone who is actively participating in his own well-being. This internal identity shift is important because behavior always follows identity. When a man sees himself as someone who takes care of his body and mind, he naturally begins to make choices that reinforce that identity in other areas of life, including relationships and intimacy. In intimate connection, what often matters most is not technique or knowledge, but emotional presence. Presence cannot be rushed or forced. It is cultivated through consistency, grounding, and internal stability. A man who is constantly mentally overloaded struggles to remain present because his attention is divided. But a man who practices nightly grounding rituals slowly trains his mind to settle, to slow down, and to stay in the moment without drifting away into distraction or pressure. This shift also improves emotional responsiveness. When a man is less internally chaotic, he becomes more aware of subtle emotional cues from his partner. He listens more deeply, not just to words, but to tone, energy, and unspoken emotion. This level of awareness strengthens connection far beyond physical interaction. It builds trust, understanding, and emotional safety, which are all essential foundations of intimacy that last beyond surface attraction. And perhaps most importantly, this nightly routine creates space for recovery that modern life rarely offers. Men are often expected to be constantly strong, constantly productive, constantly available. But without recovery, strength becomes fatigue, and presence becomes absence. The oil routine, in its simplicity, becomes a symbolic and physical act of stepping out of that constant demand. It becomes a reminder that restoration is not optional. It is necessary for sustainable energy, emotional balance, and healthy connection. As these layers begin to stack, something quietly powerful happens in a man's life. He starts to notice that he is not only more at ease in his own body, but also more emotionally stable in his relationships. Conversations feel smoother, tension reduces, and intimacy becomes less about effort and more about natural flow. He is no longer approaching connection from a place of depletion, but from a place of calm presence. And this is where the deeper transformation begins to take shape, because once a man experiences himself in this grounded state, he starts to understand that intimacy is not something separate from daily life. It is an extension of how he lives, how he rests, how he restores, and how he relates to himself when no one is watching. As this routine settles into a man's life over time, its influence stops being something he consciously thinks about and starts becoming something he simply embodies. That is where the real change lies, not in effort, but in identity. When a man no longer has to remind himself to calm down, to slow down, or to reset, because his system has already learned how to do it through repetition, his entire way of relating to intimacy begins to shift. He enters connection from a different internal place, one that is no longer reactive or uncertain, but steady and aware. And that steadiness becomes the foundation for everything that follows in his emotional and intimate life. What many men fail to realize is that attraction is not only about physical presence or surface confidence, but about the energy that is carried into shared moments. A restless mind creates restless interaction. A calm mind creates grounded interaction. When a man has spent time every night returning to himself, even through something as simple and consistent as a calming oil routine, he begins to carry a different kind of energy into his relationships. It is not louder, not more demanding, but more stable. And stability is deeply felt, even when it is not spoken about. In intimate relationships, emotional safety plays a much larger role than most people openly acknowledge. A partner may not always articulate it directly, but they feel when someone is fully present with them and when they are not. Presence is a form of emotional availability, and emotional availability is built through internal regulation. When a man is constantly overwhelmed, distracted, or mentally scattered, it becomes difficult for him to remain fully engaged in shared moments. But when he practices returning to himself daily, especially at night when the mind is most open to reset, He gradually strengthens his ability to stay present even in emotionally charged or vulnerable situations. This is where the deeper transformation becomes clear. The nighttime routine is not simply about relaxation. It is about training the nervous system to shift from survival mode into presence mode. Over time, this affects how a man handles closeness, communication, and physical connection. He becomes less focused on pressure or expectation and more focused on experience itself. That shift reduces anxiety and increases natural confidence because he is no longer trying to perform a version of himself. He is simply experiencing the moment as it is. There is also an important emotional maturity that develops through consistent self-care rituals. When a man takes responsibility for his own internal state, he begins to rely less on external validation to feel secure. This does not mean he becomes distant or detached. It means he becomes more grounded within himself. And when a person is grounded internally, they bring a different quality to intimacy. They are less easily shaken by insecurity, less reactive to misunderstanding, and more capable of holding emotional space for both themselves and their partner. Over time, this creates a subtle but powerful change in relationship dynamics. Communication becomes clearer because emotional reactivity decreases. Misunderstandings are handled with more patience rather than escalation. Affection becomes more genuine because it is no longer mixed with tension or mental distraction. And intimacy, in all its forms, begins to feel more connected and less pressured. It is important to understand that none of this happens instantly. The impact of a nighttime oil routine or any grounding ritual is cumulative. It builds slowly, layer by layer through repetition. One night does not redefine a man's emotional world, but many nights together begin to reshape it entirely. The nervous system learns patterns, and those patterns become the foundation of how a man responds to stress, connection, and closeness. As this internal foundation strengthens, something else begins to emerge, a more natural sense of confidence that does not depend on circumstances. This is not confidence that appears only in certain situations, but a baseline state of being. It is the confidence of a man who is not constantly at war with his own thoughts, who is not carrying unresolved tension into every interaction, and who is not seeking external approval to feel steady within himself. This kind of confidence is deeply attractive, not because it is performed, but because it is felt. And within intimacy, what is often most powerful is not intensity, but presence, not force, but awareness, not urgency, but connection. When a man is grounded in his own body and mind, he is able to slow down internally, even when emotions are strong or situations feel complex. That ability to remain steady creates a sense of trust in the connection itself. It allows both partners to feel more at ease, more open, and more genuinely connected without unnecessary tension or pressure. The nighttime oil routine, in its simplicity, becomes a symbol of something much larger. It represents the decision to care for oneself consistently, even in quiet moments that no one else sees. It represents the shift from neglecting the body to listening to it, from ignoring stress to releasing it, from carrying emotional weight blindly to processing it intentionally. And over time, these small nightly actions begin to influence not just how a man feels physically, but how he shows up emotionally in every part of his life. In the end, what truly changes is not just performance, not just energy, and not just confidence, but the relationship a man has with himself. Because when that relationship becomes calmer, more respectful, and more consistent, everything else naturally aligns around it. Intimacy becomes less about proving something and more about sharing something. Connection becomes less about pressure and more about presence. And life itself begins to feel more balanced, not because external circumstances changed, but because the internal state finally did. And that is the deeper truth this routine reveals. Real strength in intimacy is not built in moments of intensity, but in the quiet, repeated choices a man makes when he is alone with himself, preparing not just for sleep, but for a better version of how he shows up in every connection that matters.